All right. So happy Halloween. We are back here in Olympia and coming to you with Campaign Classroom. And you guys are really tiny down there on the screen. So, there you go. So got a full class. I see everybody's in their Halloween costumes. You're all going trick-or-treating as fully engaged students?
Right.
All right. So you guys get to start first. We're gonna be joined by another class in, I don't know, 10 minutes or something like that. But you get first shot at things. So what do you want to talk about today?
All right. Well, first of all, we've been learning about lobbying recently. So we realize that most people have a negative view of lobbyists, but we'd like to hear your opinion and your perspective on how lobbyists function and what you think of the stereotype.
Well, I think the stereotype is a little bit overblown. Whenever anybody wants to complain about how things work or don't work in Olympia, they tend to list lobbyists on their top 3 things of what's wrong. But lobbyists basically are just people who represent a particular interest. Some people call it a special interest, but everybody is a special interest. Students are a special interest. Education is a special interest. If you work at a particular business, that business, if it's not just a one-of-a-kind business, it probably has a lobbyist in Olympia that's looking out for, what law might affect that business or that industry. If you belong to an organization, whether it's the National Rifle Association or the Sierra Club, that's a special interest. Those are things that people think are important, and they think the legislature should also think that those are important, and the governor and the courts. But they primarily work the legislature when they're in session. So I think the worst thing about lobbyists is that tracking what they do is difficult. You can see them in the hallways outside the chambers of the House and the Senate talking to legislators before a vote, or you can see them in the committee hearing rooms watching how the debate goes on in a committee on a particular bill, and they all testify in support of legislation or against legislation that's important for their industry. One of the problems is that lobbyists get more chances to talk to the legislature than the average person does, because they're here in Olympia all the time. Folks you guys are up in Bellingham, right? So how long does it take to get from Bellingham to Olympia?
Couple hours.
Couple hours, yeah. So if you find out at 9 o'clock in the morning that the legislature is going to have a hearing at noon, it might be kind of tough for you to get all your stuff together. I'm glad I said stuff. And drive down to Olympia and be ready to talk to the legislature about a particular topic. They're here all the time, so 9 o'clock is 3 hours notice for them, and they're all ready to go. The legislature has taken a few steps recently to give people who come from outside Olympia more priority when a committee has limited time to hear from people. They may have an hour for a hearing on a particular bill, and they may have 100 people signed up to talk. So obviously they can't have all 100 people talking. So they give everybody a minute or 2 minutes, and then at the end of the hour they have to cut it off. So they have taken the step of saying, well, if you've come from out of Olympia, you get first preference because we talk to the lobbyists in Olympia all the time. They've also set up remote locations where people can go, if you're in Bellingham or Spokane or the Tri-Cities, you can go someplace and testify via video live to the committee. And so I think that helps even things out a little bit for lobbyists. So I think we have just been joined by the other class. Hang on just a second. We're going to flip the screen. Yep, we have been joined by the other class. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah, wave.
Hi.
Wave and smile. There you go. We were just talking about lobbyists with the other class. And so I'm wondering what hot topics have you guys got for me on this October 31st?
We have some questions about the initiatives. Does that work?
Anything you guys want to talk about? That's what I'm here for. What questions about the initiatives?
Maybe hit it.
The hot seat.
Oh, yeah. You have to go sit in the special chair. If the rest of the class doesn't like your question, they will push the chair right into the camera from behind.
Oh no, I'm not supposed to use it. Okay, so my question is, on the initiative regarding firearms, what measures would be used to discern who is mentally ill or fit to have firearms or not?
Okay. The way the initiative is written is you would file a request with the Superior Court, which is the main trial court in your county, and the people who are making this claim would have to come in and present evidence of the extreme risk that this person poses. So if it's a mental health question, it would be a mental health professional or two that would come in and give their testimony. If it's a question of, say, domestic violence or erratic behavior, dangerous behavior, it would be people who would come in who would be witnesses to that kind of behavior. The courts have these kinds of hearings for other types of orders. So they would follow standard court procedures. The difference would be that this would be a specific order which would remove firearms and potentially other dangerous weapons from this person for up to a year. But there is a provision that you could remove them for 2 weeks without the person who's having their weapons confiscated being there. But for the full year, the person who is the subject of this extreme risk protection order has a chance to be represented by an attorney and present counter evidence, rebuttal evidence, and the judge would have to decide after hearing all the evidence to have a full 1 year protection order. Okay? All right, we're going to go back to the other court or to the other classroom, and then we'll bring you guys back here. So Bellingham, you guys are up.
All right. Yeah. What can you tell us about the carbon tax initiative? How does it work? What is its purpose?
The carbon tax initiative is. I'm going to be honest here and say it was not one of the ones that I was assigned to write about. We have a reporter in Spokane at the Spokesman Review who specializes in writing about the environment, and so she was assigned to write about the carbon tax initiative because it's an environmental question. But as I understand it, it is a tax that would be placed on people on industries that create excessive amounts of carbon dioxide, and those industries presumably would pass that on to their customers. So the biggest question that most people would have is, well, how's it going to affect me? It is assumed that the petroleum industry would pass that tax on, and it would show up at the pump when you buy gasoline. So the price of gasoline would go up. Now, there are different theories on how much it would go up. And if you were a supporter of the initiative, you probably have a study that shows it would go up a few pennies. If you're an opponent of the initiative, you probably have a study that shows it would go up $1. Now, in no case do they have a study that shows it exactly the way the law is written in Washington State. At least I haven't seen one. If anybody has one that is a direct copy of what's going on in Washington State being applied somewhere else, like I said, I haven't seen one. So alleviate some of the cost of this extra tax, it would reduce other taxes in Washington state. So it's a swap, whether or not it's a revenue neutral swap, which means that even though you pay more on one side, like at the gas pump, you're not going to pay, you will pay less somewhere else. People like to claim that, but you never know until it actually goes into effect. So the proof is one of these things where you have to wait and see how it works out. The interesting thing about this particular carbon tax is that there are a lot of people who think we need to reduce carbon pollution. Not all of them support this tax, and most prominently among them would be Governor Jay Inslee, who's been trying to get some sort of carbon reduction program through the legislature for about 3 years. He has been unsuccessful at that, and the Department of Ecology has a plan to do it, but the governor does not support this initiative for the carbon tax that's on the ballot. So it's controversial. Let's go back to the other classroom. Somebody should be in the seat. We got what they do at the legislature to make sure that they don't waste time is when the next person is ready to get in the seat. So when we switch over to Bellingham, then you guys get to put somebody in the seat and they can sit there. So what's your question?
Okay, so my question is also concerning the firearms initiative.
Okay.
What do you think would be the pros and cons of this initiative?
Well, I think that one of the pros is that if there are people out in the community who are dangerous, taking their guns away from them could reduce the damage that they could do for whatever activity they've been adjudged to be dangerous. The cons would be that this is a system that's only in place in a couple of states. And whenever you try to do something new, there's always a period of time where people have to get used to the new system. There can be mistakes. The right to keep and bear arms is a constitutional right. It is not an absolute constitutional right, but it is a constitutional right, just like the right of free speech. There are things that you can't say just because the First Amendment guarantees you the right of free speech. There are also things that you cannot do with a firearm, even though the U.S. Constitution and the Washington State Constitution has a right to keep and bear arms. So I think one of the true downsides of it is that if it passes, there's going to be some legal challenges to it. And that could be expensive and time consuming, but I think it's worth a try if you can keep people from doing horrific things with guns that can do a lot of damage.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going back to Bellingham. Next.
I'm also reading about the role of the media in politics. So could you share your view of what role you think the media plays and what role it should play in our politics?
Well, the role that the media should play is to give all of you and your parents and grandparents, all the people who are going to vote, the information that they need to make their decision. What the media should not do is tell you who to vote for or how to vote. So, and here I'm talking about reporters, because that's the job that I have, and it's the job that I've done for about 40 years. So my job is to tell you what you need to know about candidates and issues so that you can make a decision. And since I can't tell you everything, I can point you to other locations, websites, magazines, other newspapers, where you can find more information. And that's what we try to do both in print in the newspaper and on our website. So we hook you up with all the information that you need. It's not my job to tell you that one candidate is better than the other or worse than the other. It's not my job to tell you to vote for or against a particular initiative. So when I'm doing these sessions and people ask me, how should I vote or what should I do about it? All I'm trying to do is say, consider this or think about that. Now, newspapers do have an editorial page. It's an opinion page. And they're the people who write the editorials. They interview candidates or they interview the campaigns for or against a particular initiative. And they come to a conclusion and they tell readers what their conclusion is, that they think candidate A is better than candidate B, or they think you should vote against an initiative rather than for an initiative, and then they tell you why. But you're free to say, well, that's not a good reason, or you didn't consider this, this trait of a particular candidate. So the news media works on the assumption that there are engaged voters and they want information and that they can think for themselves after they get that information. The downside of that is that not all voters care about getting a wide array of information. They may like a particular candidate and they don't want to hear anything about positive about the opponent or negative about the candidate that they like. And we know that happens, but we still try to give them all the information so that they can sort through it. Do you have a follow-up there? You're kind of looking at me like, I don't know about this.
I have a follow-up for him.
All right, speak into the microphone, please.
I'll let you pick it up.
Don't you think the media also decides which issues are important? By highlighting certain issues over other issues, the media shapes what we think is important.
We do have to give more coverage to some issues than other issues. And that's particularly true in a year like this, where if you've looked at your ballot, it's really long. And there are 9 measures or initiatives on the ballot just for the state. And then there's local initiatives. And then there's everything from the president down to county commissioner and as far as candidates. So obviously, the presidential race gets more coverage than the county commissioner race does, particularly if the county commissioner is running unopposed. So in that sense, we do shape the public opinion, but we are also trying to discern from the public what they want to know most about. And we have ways of doing this. We can tell what stories are getting the most hits on the website, for example, and drawing the most comments. And so we use that in trying to determine, okay, what do we need to cover today that we didn't cover very well yesterday? And so in that sense, yeah, the media shapes the debate, but at the same time, the campaigns and where they are going with it sometimes shape the media. So the best example of that is on Friday, there was information about the FBI looking at emails that are connected to Hillary Clinton's time at the State Department. Now, the initial reports of that were that they were looking at reopening investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. That's not really true, and as more information sort of piddled out over the weekend, turned out that it was not a Hillary Clinton email account. It was the email account of the estranged husband of one of her aides. So we kind of had to catch up on that. I'm using the we in a grand sense because this is the national media, and this is not my story, so I wasn't writing about it, but I did watch it over the weekend. So in that sense, yeah, we sort of shaped the campaign, but the campaign was also shaping the coverage. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg argument some days, but so, and we are going back to the other classroom there, where they have somebody waiting. Okay, what's your question?
My question is on Initiative 735, which urges the Washington State congressional delegation to propose a federal constitutional amendment that constitutional rights belong only to individuals, not corporations, and constitutionally protected free speech excludes the spending of money. What do they mean by, well, if constitutional rights protecting free if constitutional rights belong only to individuals and not corporations, what in what aspects would that limit? In what aspects would, or how would corporations be limited by that? And in terms of free speech, and how it excludes the spending of money, what could you not say that relates to the spending of money?
Okay. Thanks for spelling out what Initiative 735 is, because I have a really hard time remembering the initiatives by number, and sometimes say, well, what do you think about initiative such and such and such? And I'm going, which one is that? But this is an interesting initiative because it tries to get at one of the hottest topics of politics right now, which is who can spend money trying to influence how you vote, and how much money can they spend. Now, a fairly recent Supreme Court decision, it's a couple years, so that may not seem so recent to you guys, but fairly recent in the history of political campaign giving, is that political speech, which is deemed among the freest speech in America because it helps us determine our government, that first of all, the campaign spending is free speech, and your ability to spend money to talk for or against a candidate or for or against an initiative is protected. Citizens United, which is the case that this is directly trying to address, in the Citizens United case, the Supreme Court said those rights are equally used both by a person and by a corporation. So a corporation has certain rights to spend money in campaigns. This is different from the way campaign contribution laws have been written for since the 1970s, which was a person can spend X amount of dollars. A business, a corporation, or a union cannot spend its direct money. It must set up what's called a political action committee, give money to the political action committee, and the political action committee spends money in a campaign. Citizens United also says that because free speech, because political speech is free speech, it is not necessarily legal to put tight limits on how much you can spend. Because if you say, well, yeah, you have free speech, but you can only spend $10, is that really free speech? So it's very controversial with individuals who say, well, I don't have $1 million to spend, but some big national corporation, $1 million to them is next to nothing. So 735 tries to address this by saying the Constitution should be amended so that it makes it clear that free speech is something that a person has, but is not something that a corporation has. Under the law, a corporation has some rights that are similar to an individual. And that's a really long and complicated legal argument. And I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on television, so I'm not going to try and make the legal arguments on both sides for this. But so 735 tries to address this. One of the interesting things about 735 is it does not tell the congressional delegation a specific way to address it. It urges them to do something about it, but it doesn't say, here's the constitutional amendment we think you should push for. So they would be free to try and address it in different ways, although the most effective way to address it would probably be a constitutional amendment that would have to get a supermajority in both houses of Congress and then be sent to the states and pass 3/4 of the states. So it would, it's sort of like an opening shot in the war, but it's not the final solution. It's not the final battle to the war. Okay, we are going to go back to Bellingham.
Do you have any questions?
Next.
Okay, I've got a follow-up on that, what you were just talking about. Is there like any precedent for any effect that this initiative could have? Like, has there ever been an initiative kind of like this where someone is pushing for change in a constitutional amendment that actually ended up fruitful, I guess?
Well, almost all of the constitutional amendments that we have come from an idea somewhere in the country that the U.S. Constitution doesn't quite cover everything that we need it to cover. So I guess the best example of that is prohibition. Back in the 19-teens, there were a lot of people that thought you shouldn't be able to drink. Drinking is bad for you. It has all kinds of bad social implications. And so some states began making it illegal to sell or manufacture liquor, including Washington State. In Washington State, we had a prohibition against the manufacture and sale of alcohol in about at the beginning of 1916, about 100 years ago right now. Eventually, there was enough push around the country that Congress passed a prohibition, and it went into effect in the country. I think it's in 1920 that it took effect. But so a movement that said alcohol is bad, we should get rid of it, started at the states, and it moved to Congress, and enough people got elected to Congress that thought, yeah, we should do this, and so they then sent the Congress passed the initiative. It went to the states, and the states passed it. There have been examples of amendments that didn't quite make it all the way through the process, and the most recent one that I can think of is the Equal Rights Amendment, which would guarantee equal rights regardless of gender or. I'm not sure if the Equal Rights Amendment dealt with sexual orientation, because this was back in the 60s, and the main thing was equal rights for men and women. It passed Congress. It did not get all of the states to ratify it before the time ran out. So it never became part of the Constitution at the time when we were making some changes. So back in the late 60s and early 70s is when they lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. That was another movement that started by people saying, well, if you could get drafted at 18 and you can go into the military and you can fight for your country and maybe even die for your country, maybe you ought to be able to vote at 18. And so that was an example of an amendment that was an idea that it was it was an easier idea to come up with because we were just moving it from 21 to 18, but it came from the states, went to the Congress. Congress passed it, sent it back to the states, and enough states ratified it that it passed rather quickly. And we're going back to the hot seat there. Yay! What are we wearing what are you wearing on your head there?
I'm a shark attack.
Oh, okay. Sharknado.
Yeah. Why is a lack of experience considered a positive in some cases, such as Trump and Joshua Trumbull?
Well, because some people think of Washington or Olympia or City Hall as being a place that if you weren't corrupt when you started, it corrupts you while you're there. So if you have not been exposed to the corruption, then you are better able to understand what the average person needs and wants, and you aren't so beholden to special interests. So it's not lack of experience by itself that can be seen as a good thing, because if you have no experience at anything, you aren't a very good candidate, and you'd have a really hard time getting elected. But if you have a lack of experience in government, but you have experience in something else that people think would be really good for a governor, a president, a legislator, or a mayor, then sometimes that is seen as a plus. And you can make the case that the person who's been in office for a long time isn't doing a very good job because look at how bad things are. That's the standard argument that you would make is if you're happy with the way things are right now, vote for this person who's in office or who's been in office for a long time. If you're not happy with the way things are, you should give somebody else a chance. And it's not new to Donald Trump or Mr. Trumbull. It's probably as old as the Republic. After George Washington stopped being president, he served 2 terms and then he stepped down. There was probably arguments between, should we elect John Adams because he was vice president, or should we elect somebody else? I think it was a little bit of a tough call because the person who wound up running against Adams was Thomas Jefferson, and he'd been in the administration too. But it happens in almost every election.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, try that. Be interesting to see if you can keep that hat on all day. All right. I see by the clock at the lower corner of my computer that we are about out of time. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, we got one more question. We're going to go to Bellingham for one more question.
Our bell is going to ring, so we are done.
You're done, huh?
Yeah, we have a bell ringing.
Oh, okay. All right. So we don't have time for one more question in Bellingham. So we'll go. All right.
We're also done. Thank you.
All right. We'll go back to you guys came in late, so you get the last question.
Do you have your one more question?
Yeah.
We have one more.
Okay, hi, remember me? Okay. So,
All right.
Assuming that
You have a skeleton shirt on underneath that?
yeah.
All right.
Assuming that 735 passes and then the amendment passes, what would be the effect of that on American politics?
Well, it kind of depends on how the amendment is worded. So I think what they are trying to do is make it so that big corporations and unions cannot give large amounts of money to candidates or to independent campaigns. So I think the goal is to make the total amount that any one person can give a limited amount so that it's sort of equal. I mean, there's always going to be people who can give, say, $2,000 to a campaign and people who can't. Because to some people, $2,000 isn't really very much money. To other people, it's like, 4 months rent. So that they're not going to give 4 months rent to some candidate. But if you can set a reasonable limit for the amount of money that any one person can give to any one candidate, you can sort of equalize the playing field within elections. Now, there are other proposals that say, well, we should get rid of campaign contributions altogether, and then the state or the city or the federal government should give candidates a certain amount of money, and then everybody has the same amount of money that they can run and use in their campaigns. That's not necessarily a good idea, because that would also tell you that you have to decide whether or not a person who's got $1 billion and wants to spend part of that to get elected, would they be limited to how much they could spend of their own money on their own campaign? And so, there's a lot of different aspects to campaign contributions, and without seeing the amendment, you really can't say how it might affect totally the campaigns. But the goal is to get some of these big donations out of the campaign system so that one candidate running against another has a relatively equal playing field.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. You guys have a happy Halloween.
Yeah, you as well. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.